All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to welcome everyone tonight to our community forum regarding the levies. So before we start, I want to introduce everyone who's here. We have on our panel Dr. Middleton, our superintendent. We have Marshall Cruz, our financial director. We have Director Carey, myself, Director Butler. We have Director Ledoux, Director Kincaid, and Director Veach. And so we're going to get started. So before we actually begin, we're going to go over a few of the goals and expectations of tonight's forum. The goals is to present information about the levies that are on the ballot, and then to answer questions regarding the levies that the community has. A couple expectations. We're expecting to present in large group in this whole forum till about 6:45. And then from 6:45 to 7 o'clock, we're going to have kind of a meeting individuals with stakeholders, kind of a mix and mingle and talk about levies and answer questions you might have. We're going to have the expectation to stay on topic. We're talking about levies tonight. And of course, the expectation to be respectful to everyone involved. So how this is going to work is I'm going to turn actually the time over now to Dr. Middleton, our superintendent, to kick us off.
Good evening, everybody, and we want to welcome those who are watching by Zoom. And for those who are watching by Zoom, if they do have a question, then they can type that question into the chat, and we have someone monitoring that, and they can submit those questions, and they'll be submitted to us to respond to. And then for those in the audience here right now, if you have a question, I know that there's paper in the back. If you have a question, we have people who will distribute pen and paper if you have a question, and then they will collect that question. And again, we'll respond to those. So before I get too far into some of the questions that have been submitted already, again, we're talking about the two levies that are on the ballot right now, and ballots have been mailed out. And for consideration is the education and operations levy, which is for $5 million for over each year for 4 years. And that levy, of course, covers the things that the state does not fully fund our programs for. And so we have things like athletics, and curriculum adoption is one item that is written on the ballot as well. That's something that our district has not been able to adopt on a regular basis. And so we've specifically put in $500,000 per year for such an adoption. We're really just trying to maintain our current programs. And again, those things that aren't fully funded. The other levy is our capital levy, which includes both smaller projects, facility projects, equipment to help maintain our facilities, as well as a good portion of it goes to our tech department. And certainly over the last 2 years, we've become very reliant on our technology as our students really have had to oftentimes work remotely, whether it was our entire district or whether students were on quarantine. But aside from that, we're also a district that embraces the technology. We are the hub of technology in the Pacific Northwest, and we certainly want our students to leave here well equipped. And so we do have a one-to-one program, so every student does have a Chromebook. And so that allows them to do their schoolwork on that, and again, have the skills necessary for them to be successful in the future. At this time, I think there'll be a number of questions tonight that will be directed toward our business and finance director, Marshall Cruz. And I know that he has some questions that he wants to cover first. And then we want to open it up to those on Zoom or those who are here in the audience.
Okay, so we've had quite a few questions submitted from via email or calls, and we wanted to kind of start off with those. The first question we received was, why is the tax rate lower on the April ballot than it was on the February ballot? The main reason for that is that when we submitted our ballot measures for the February ballot, we had to do those in November, and we didn't have the new data for what the assessed valuation of property in Granite Falls was. So every year, Snohomish County releases the assessed valuations of property in every community. They released ours, I think it was February. And so we were able to use the updated valuation. So we have a lot of new houses being built. We have increased value of houses. We have even some commercial in the district. So that raised the value of property in our district, which lowered the rate. So again, we're only asking for a flat dollar amount. So as more houses come to the district and property increases, the tax rate lowers. So the second question that we were submitted was, what is the difference between the fixed amount versus a fixed rate on my property tax bill? So when you look at your property tax bill, there's several different line items for taxes. Some of those line items they all show as a rate on your tax bill. Some of those are a fixed rate, and some of those are a dollar amount that whoever is asking for the taxes is trying to raise. So for instance, we're trying to raise $5 million for our general fund levy. So as there's more houses and as there's higher property values, the rate to get to $5 million goes down. Other line items on your tax bill are flat rate. So if your flat rate is $1 per $1,000 in assessed value, as your house goes up in value, the amount of taxes you're paying goes up as well because it's a flat rate, and these taxes are to generate variable amounts of revenue. So it's kind of like a sales tax. You know, there's no cap. If you are buying a $50,000 car and you're paying a 9% tax rate, you're going to pay a large number. If you're buying a $30,000 car, you're still paying that 9% tax rate. It's a smaller number, but it's still 9%. So the difference between levies is that levies are asking for a dollar amount, $5 million in this case, that is spread out among all the homeowners, all the property owners in the district. The flat rate tax is asking for a flat rate, maybe $2, maybe $1 per assessed value, that grows, and your bill grows as your house grows in value. Does that make sense to everybody? The third question that was asked was the intent of the McCleary Act to eliminate all local school taxes? The intent was to fully fund basic education. When the law was first written or voted into with the legislatures back in 2017, it included a local property tax still. That local property tax was limited to be $1.50 per $1,000 in assessed values. And then they introduced, I think, a statewide educational tax that was supposed to help reduce the local taxes. Before McCleary, so the thing that changed was how much you get reimbursed for a staff member. Before McCleary, there was a statewide allocation, whether you're in Spokane, whether you're in Granite Falls, whether you're in Seattle, whether you're in Centralia. The reimbursement rate for a teacher, and I'm going off of memory, I have it in my notes, so I'll go off of memory, was $35,000. So for every teacher you have, that is generated by what they call the prototypical school model, which is just if you have 400 students in a grade school, you're allocated this many teachers, you're allocated this many support staff, and the state assigns a dollar value to that, and they multiply the allocated staffing units times that dollar value, and that's how they give you the funding. So prior to McCleary, it was in the neighborhood of $35,000. That was statewide. And then they had this factor called experience factor. So depending upon how much education and how many years of experience your staff members have, your teachers only, this is for teachers only, you would get a boost in what the state provides you in allocation. And that boost for us was 1.5. So the $35,000 became $52,000. The experience factor was very similar throughout the state. So really, even with that model, every school district in the state is getting pretty similar amount of revenue based on the prototypical school model and the allocation method. When McCleary came, one thing they did is they boosted up the reimbursement rate for staffing units. They did not change the prototypical school model. They raised the salary reimbursement levels. They eliminated the experience factor. So the experience factor no longer exists. And instead, they added this thing called regionalization that we talk about a lot. The regionalization is similar intent to the experience factor. It's designed to help provide additional funding to schools that live in areas that their staff members live in areas that are high cost to live in. So regionalization is anywhere between 0 to 6 to 12 to 18 to 24% increase on the allocation model. For Granite Falls, we're 12% increase. For Darrington is a 12% increase. Everybody else within Snohomish County and a lot of King County is either 18 or 24% regionalization. So what that means is now the state has a statewide allocation for teachers from McCleary. I'm using teachers because it's easiest to compare. That is about, going off of memory, $68,000. And then they add the regionalization factor to that to give you a reimbursement rate for staff. So for us, that comes to about $73,000, I think. To a district that has a higher regionalization, like Lake Stevens or Everett or Marysville or Snohomish, they come out at 24%. So they get $80,000. So $7,000 more per every teacher that we're allocated. For a district that is 18%, like Sultan, like Monroe, like Arlington, like Lakewood. I know there's some others that I'm missing. Stanwood, I think. They get about $77,000. So another $4,000 on top of what we get. So what McCleary did was it certainly put more money into the education system to provide better salaries, for sure, to provide better funding for school education, but it created these tremendous inequities between surrounding districts. If you have a job at Boeing, for instance, you probably work or live anywhere 25-mile radius from Boeing. Same thing if you have a job here in Marysville in teaching, or in Granite Falls in teaching, or in Snohomish, you're probably coming somewhere in a 25-mile radius and commuting in. So we're having to compete with this workforce that can make more money in districts like Snohomish, Everett, Marysville, Mukilteo, really everywhere except for Darrington. They can make more money, and we're asking them to travel further because we're probably furthest away from major metropolitan hubs. So it did provide more money, but it actually provided greater inequities between districts than pre-McCleary. The thing that McCleary would have been nice if McCleary had fixed was the prototypical school model, because the prototypical school model does a pretty good job of allocating teachers to school districts, but it does a terrible job, for everything else. So an example for that, and this is available on our website, and it's been sent out in publications. Some examples of this are that we are allocated 0.3 school nurses by the prototypical school model. So we have legal requirements to have nurses at a lot of schools. We have health requirements to have nurses at a lot of those schools. The result is we have either a nurse or a health room attendant, but often both, at every school. We're allocated for 0.3. 0.3 of $50,000 is a third of $50,000 is about $15,000. So we're given from the state $15,000 to pay for all of our nursing needs. Well, 5 nurses plus 3 health room attendants, that's probably more in the range of $300,000. So the levy pays for that difference. I think it'd be difficult to run a school without school nurses on what the typical school model provides. Another example of that is there's a line item called student safety. Student safety includes crossing guards, student supervisors, campus monitors who are walking around making sure that no bullying is going on or kids are going to the right place at the right time. They're not vaping. They're not doing things that kids do when they're not supervised. We have, I don't know, 15 FTE. FTE is a full-time equivalent because a crossing guard maybe works 3 hours a day. So they're not, so they're considered about 33% of an FTE because they're working about a third of a day. So we have district-wide about 20 FTE on that. We receive funding for about, I think it's about a quarter of an FTE. So all that money comes out of the levy, or else we don't have those positions. Paraeducators or classroom help is another category that's horrendously under allocated. District-wide, we're allocated for 3.5 paraeducators. Those are the staff that are in the classroom, helping students, helping teachers provide the educational experience for kids. None of that, 3.5 FTE are allocated by the particular school model. So while McCleary did put a little more money into the education system, it allocated that money to help normalize salaries of existing staff. It did nothing to provide funding for all these support positions, like athletics, for instance. There's zero funding from the state for athletics, for clubs, for extracurricular activities. We either have to use our levy dollars to pay for that. We have to have pay for play. We have to do a lot of things to raise money to pay for athletics because that doesn't come out of the prototypical school model. Curriculum isn't part of the prototypical school model. We have to use our levy dollars to support that. So really, and the state is somewhat aware that the prototypical school model needs to be looked at. They started looking at it in this last legislative session, but they really, in order to fully fund education, they need to better define what the basics of education are because they lean on the basics of education. And crossing guards, paraeducators, student supervisors, nurses, psychologists, all of these social workers, all of these things, counselors, we're funded for 3 counselors. Well, that's not even enough for all of our schools. The full student need is all of these support positions along with just teachers. All right, I'll keep going. Well, I kind of segued into the second question. Didn't the McCleary Act fully fund K-12 education? The McCleary Act added additional funding to 3 categories of education. It added additional funding for teaching staff to try and bring that up to a level that is competitive and will attract more teachers because I think we hear on the news all the time what a tremendous teacher shortage there is in the state of Washington. So McCleary Act, the intent was to better fund teacher salaries for sure, to better fund administrator salaries for sure. You know, the funding for a principal was $60,000 before McCleary. I don't know that anybody would want to be a principal for $60,000 a year. I mean, that's not a lot more than, that's just not a lot of money. It gave us $30,000 for a classified staff. So for a paraeducator, for a secretary, for a student supervisor, all those staff, we got $30,000 per allocated FTE. And I think the state realized that, well, we're not going to have people working in education at $30,000 for a secretary a year, $60,000 for a principal, 35 plus experience was $52,000 or $55,000 for a teacher. So McCleary absolutely put more money in the education system. And part of that was to help attract people to work in these professions when they were really hard to attract people to work. But what it didn't do is fix the prototypical school model, which is really the part of education that's probably the most broken. Yeah.
We actually have about 5 questions that were submitted through your presentation. So the first one came through when you were talking about local school taxes and cost per assessed value. So if the housing market crashes next year, will we then be paying more in levy taxes to make up the 5 million?
If the housing market crashes, because we are collecting a flat dollar amount, not a rate, your rate will likely go up, but the total amount being collected per household, unless houses get abandoned and nobody is living in them, and they are, I think even if banks own houses, they still have to pay the property taxes. Yeah, so the dollar amount that an individual household will be paying will not change. If your house goes down from $500,000 to $300,000, your rate would go up from 184 to 275. I'm making these numbers up, but the total amount, the final line item on your tax bill for the amount that you owe, excuse me, to the county assessor or the county tax collector will be exactly the same as it was, unless for whatever reason, all of a sudden there's a drastic reduction of property in this community.
Okay, the next question is, how many nurses and how many counselors does the school district employ or have on staff?
We're at the point right now, counselors, we have 5 counselors. Is that correct? I think 5 counselors, 6 counselors, nurses and health room attendants. It's getting really hard to hire nurses. We have we're having to use third-party contract providers to get nurses because COVID has either burnt out nurses to the point where they don't want to be nurses anymore. So across the board, whether it's hospitals, doctors' offices, or schools. 2, it's super competitive. People aren't going into the field, so they are choosing to work places that pay a lot more money than a school district does. Beth, do you know how many nurses we have and health room attendants? So we have 3 nurses and we probably have 4 health room attendants. So 7 people on the nursing staff being funded by that 0.3 FTE allocation across 5 buildings. Yeah. So when we talk about these allocations, the state looks at each school and how many, actually looks at each grade band, and that's how it determines the staffing allocation. And where we staff those people is kind of a management decision at the school district. But we have to have nurses and health room attendants and counselors at every school.
Okay, the next question, is there an upper threshold for the levy rate in the event property values drop?
So the way the state law is written, we have 2 metrics for how we can levy dollars. There is $2.50 per $1,000 in assessed value is one metric. The other metric is $2,500 per student FTE. So both of those numbers generate a dollar value significantly higher than what our levies ask for. You know, we try and do as much as we can with as little as we can, because, you know, we understand the climate. You know, we understand where people are coming from on these things. If property taxes, I think with levies, I think we maybe concentrate a little too much on the rate and not as much on what the per household expense would be, because really what we're doing is we're levying, you know, a dollar amount that is being spread out among all the households in our district. Whether your house is worth, well, so let's say every house in Granite Falls is worth $500,000. It's just a magical world where every house is exactly the same and they're all worth $500,000. And your tax rate is $2 per $1,000 in assessed value, and you're paying, I think that's $1,000 per household. Let's say all of a sudden now the housing market just crashes like it did maybe back in, or even worse than it did back in 2008, 2009. And all of a sudden every house in Granite Falls is now worth $250,000 and is assessed at $250,000. Well, sure, your rate's going to go up to $4, but the amount of money that's being collected per household is still $1,000, because levies are a flat rate of collection, not a flat rate of charge. So where your tax dollars will go down if the housing market crashes, and where your tax dollars really go up if the housing market crashes, is those rates that aren't attached to a set dollar amount at the end. Those rates that are a solid rate, like $1 per $1,000 in assessed value, no matter how much assessed value is in the district. So as the district grows and as your house grows up in value, well, that dollar stays the same, but now your house is worth a lot more. So the amount of money that the tax collector is collecting on that line item grows. If the housing market declines, that dollar is still a dollar, and the amount of money that's being collected for that line item will also decline.
There were 2 additional questions submitted. Does the school district purchase curriculum updates, and how much do we spend on curriculum updates?
I feel like that's a little out of my wheelhouse. Josh, you want to hit that one?
I might even have Dr. Manns if there's a dollar figure that you've been working with, but our goal right now is to have this levy with $500,000 per year, because it does take about that much in a district our size to adopt a curriculum K-12. And our past practice has been, when there've been little pockets of money, anywhere from, you know, maybe 20,000 to 40,000. And Dr. Manns, if I'm off base, just let me know. We might purchase curriculum for, let's just say, middle school science, and it just covers that grade, or elementary math. But really, for a curriculum or for a district to be highly successful, it needs a K-12 adoption. And you basically adopt a curriculum every 6 years. So right now we're looking at math adoption, K-12. We would take a look at math adoption again in 2027, 2028. So about every 5 to 7 years, you look at a new adoption. But next year, again, based on levy dollars, we're looking at perhaps science for the next K-12 adoption. But really what we've done because of limited resources is we've done a lot of pilot programs where a vendor will say, would you try out this program with us? So while we appreciate that and it's filled some holes, it's not a systemic approach that we need to have in order to have a viable curriculum, which will lead to greater academic success. Anything else to add, Dr. Manns? Okay.
So a follow-up question to that was, when was the last time there was a K-12 curriculum adoption?
We have a whole group of educators in the room tonight, some who've been here a long time, and all are just wondering when that last time was.
Can I answer that?
Please.
I've been here for 20 years, and when I was hired in 2002, we had a K-5, maybe K-8 math adoption that we were learning. Hi, Julie Dixon. I've been here for 20 years. And when I was hired in 2002, we had a K-8 math adoption. And then we had a K-5, won't call it a reading program. It was more like a reading philosophy that we adopted called CORE. And that was kind of it. And then we've kind of done like math things for certain grade levels. And not our last superintendent, but the one before that, we did, our superintendent, the community bought our books for us at Math Connects. And that was our last grade level math adoption. And I don't think, Joelle, was that K-8 or was that more like K-5? K-12 Math Connects, okay. And that was, okay, yeah, it was a different name. Doctor, more than that. I'm gonna say it was like 14 years ago.
Okay, 14
So,
years.
yeah.
Thank you.
Just to go back to the nurses, how many nurses the district has on staff. The question came through on our employee salary chart. It only lists one nurse. Can you clarify why that is?
Yes, we have one nurse who is a Granite Falls employee. We have contracted with nurses over the last 3 years since I've been here because we've not been able to hire nurses because of a number of reasons. I think we're looking at both the pandemic as well as not having a competitive wage to draw them here. And so we continue to advertise for nurses, but right now we are contracting with a number of them. That's a good point. Director Carey brought up that this is not unique to Granite Falls, that a number of districts have this concern.
Yeah, I was just making sure we don't need to stay for questions.
You're good? Okay, great. So we can go to our next previously submitted question. Did splitting the grade school save money or cost money? And so again, this will be a little bit of history lesson because that was before my time, but we used to have 2 K-5 schools. And at some point, the decision was to have one school that was K-1-2 and another that's 3-4-5. And of course, we have preschool and other special programs at these schools, but basically the breakdown. And so we have students start at Mountain Way, moved to Monte Cristo, then to the middle school. So the question is, did that save money or cost money? And I will say that when I applied for this job 3 years ago, I was pleased to see that this format was in place because I had been in a district in Montana that did that exact same thing. And it was to save money because you might have in one school, maybe in fourth grade, an average of 12 students, while at the other school, you might have an average class size of 28 or 24. And when you have a boundary that determines where students go, that just, causes some inequities and it's really some inefficiencies when it comes to staffing. And so what I found, and I think what Granite Falls found, is when we had one school handle all the grade levels, like K1, 2, and then 3, 4, 5, there was an efficiency of having class sizes being much more manageable and number of staff. We also had, I was told that when we had two different schools, sometimes you had combo grade levels. So you might have maybe 3 sections of third grade and maybe 3 sections of fourth grade. And then you had, a few students that couldn't make up that next section. So it was a combination 3, 4. And again, really didn't make sense when at the other school, they might be really full, or maybe they had some spots. So it just created some efficiency. So in my mind, it saved money in my old district, and I know it saves money with that efficiency here.
Sure. Okay, so we had quite a few questions actually submitted offline before the event. So the next question that was submitted was, did the last levy pay for security improvements? So I guess this is a good opportunity to talk about levies and bonds. So levies are reoccurring revenue sources that are used to pay for really ongoing expenses. Bonds are things that we do every once in a while to try and make significant, super costly upgrades to the district. So in 2000, and right before I got here, we asked the voters to vote for a bond that included security improvements, a remodel of a building at the middle school to make it heavily STEM focused, STEAM focused actually, because arts are added to that, and a grandstand at our high school stadium. So that passed, the community passed that bond with better than 60% vote. It takes 60% plus 1 to pass a bond. It takes 50% plus 1 to pass a levy. Bonds are usually for large amounts of money. That bond was for, I believe, $12 million. And it gets paid back over an extended period of time. It's like the community is, it's like we're getting a loan from investors, and the community is helping us pay that back. So that bond part of that bond was for security improvements, and those security improvements were to have upgraded camera systems, upgraded building entrance systems, interfaces with the cloud, so that the police and fire could have access to know what's going on in our buildings. We added probably a couple of hundred cameras. We added much more robust online monitoring so that I can check a camera. If something's going on, I can check a camera from my house. The police can check the cameras from the police station. They are not part of this question. So this question was long, and it was a paragraph. Part of the question was they thought that we were going to have cameras in every classroom, but that really wasn't the intent of that bond. The intent was to have better security in common areas and not not place cameras in the classroom because everybody feels like that's kind of intrusive. And so we wanted better security to cover the dark corners of the buildings, stairwells, outsides of the buildings, just where mischief can happen and where vandalism could happen, where entry points where something bad could enter the building, all those places we wanted to have upgraded security, not really to provide the ability to monitor classrooms. So I'm happy to say that we did achieve everything that bond promised the community, and that just as a reminder, it was a bond that paid for that, not a levy. The levy would not be nearly enough money to pay for projects of that size. Accountability. So there was a general, it was kind of a second part of the levy question around accountability. Like, how do we, I guess, prove to the community that we're spending our money wisely, that we're utilizing our bonds, our levies, our budgets, our grants appropriately? There's being a public entity, there's an overwhelming number of checks and balances in place to make sure that we're doing things as we say we're going to do them. For grants, for instance, we have to apply for the grant every year. We have to present the grantor with a plan that we're going to do when we are implementing the grant. And then we have to report back on the progress of that grant monthly to receive reimbursements. It's almost like we have to turn in receipts to the federal government or the state, whoever's providing the grant. And then once they get the receipts, they will give us the money. So budgets, we submit a budget at the beginning of the year. The budget gets reviewed by the ESD, which is the Educational Services District, which is kind of like a bigger mothership than the district office here. There's, I don't know, 7 or 8, 9 ESDs in the state. They are in charge of regions. Our regional ESD is up in Anacortes. Yeah, and the school board reviews the budget, and we publish the budget every year. We have an actual open board session, a couple of them usually, to talk about the budget so that community members can provide input. The levies, we actually have to track. The state requires us at a high level to track what we're spending, not just our levies, but how we spend our state money, our federal money, and our local money. And levies fall into the local money, along with a few other things that falls into local money. So we do have to report out on that to the state every year, and we have to publish those reports open for the public to view. And we have a end of year review with the school board that's open to the public as well. Bonds are rare. So it's, we tend to have a celebration that we talk to the community about what we accomplished with the bond. Did we accomplish everything we were supposed to? And then the next level of accountability is all of these things fall under numerous audits by independent agencies that come in and audit us, and they publish those audit reports. Well, I send out a district-wide email that summarizes the audit reports and things that we could be doing better and things that we're doing well. But that's also public record that's published out on the state auditor's website. And we have an exit hearing. We review it with the board. So we have an annual audit that takes about 5 to 6 weeks every year. We have program level audits that happen multiple times throughout the year. And we have what's called an accountability audit every 2 years by the state, where they come in and they spend probably 2 to 3 months going over whatever they want to go over. And it can be suggestions by the community of things that they would like to have the auditors look at. It could be suggestions by us of things we want to have the auditors look at. It could also be things that they have determined other districts haven't been doing very well, and they want to make sure that we're not falling in those same traps. So, and those are all public record as well. I feel like Melanie might have something from the digital audience. Yeah.
I do. I have a few.
Robert would make a quick comment.
So we did set the expectation to finish questions at 6:45. I think we can kind of push that back a little bit to get the last couple questions from the public. I do want to leave time for us to mingle with those in attendance. So can you go until about 6:55? Okay, thank you.
Okay, so there was a question that came through for clarification with nurses versus health room attendants. Can you explain why we need nurses for our student population versus health room attendants?
So, and Beth, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong on this, but if a student has certain medical conditions, we're required to have a certificated nurse in the building. And we have health room attendants to handle the normal day-to-day stuff like skinned knee. I've got a cold, I'm throwing up, I need my temperature taken, those kind of things. But we also have students that have seizure problems or that have are diabetic or need that extra level of care. And we're legally required to have a licensed nurse on hand to handle those situations.
Okay, you've alluded to the high percentage of special ed students. Can you elaborate on that observation and the implications in the budget context?
Sure, that's actually a great question because it's one of the things that the state, I would advocate, it's one of the number one things that the state could actually fix. School districts get extra money for students that are identified as, just use the general terms, special education. So we have a base allocation for a student, and then we get a little bit of extra money, not a little bit, a lot of extra money, because a special ed student has higher needs than a regular student. So, but the state limits that to we're only allowed to receive extra funding for 13.5% of our student population, regardless of whether there's a higher population of special ed students in our district or not. The state has a cap of 13.5%. So we have somewhere in the neighborhood of 20%. And there's a lot of reasons why we have 20%. We have an abnormally high homeless and transient population. We have abnormally high population of families that have substance abuse problems. We have a much higher than what's allocated special ed student count. So the state gives us a little extra funding for that 13.5%, but the extra costs that we incur for that other 6.5%, initially that comes out of our levy, and then we have to beg, plead, hope that we can get some money back from this thing called safety net. Safety net says that if we're spending more than I'm going to make a round number, it's 33,000 or something, but let's say $35,000. If we're spending more than $35,000 on a student, we can actually request through massive paperwork and reporting, the state reimburses for the costs above $35,000. So we have to pay that first $35,000 out of our own pocket. But once it gets above $35,000 and we dot all our I's and cross all our T's, we can request reimbursement. We're legally required to have equal access to education for all students. And some students have extremely costly needs. Safety net helps us capture beyond that first $35,000, but for that 6.5%, we have to pay that $35,000 out of our own pocket before we can get any help from the state.
How much money from the last levy was spent on security equipment and services? Do you have that number?
So I don't have that number off the top of my head. I would say that we have an annual contract with our security monitoring company that is, I don't want to, it's probably in the neighborhood of $60,000 a year. And then if we purchase additional equipment, like we determine that a camera breaks and we want to replace it, or we determine that there's some consistent mischief going on somewhere that we need to add some additional security, well, we have to purchase those things outside of that contract. And that would come out of levy money. But off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you how much annually we spend from the levy on security.
Just one more clarifying question on curriculum. Are we purchasing curriculum materials at this point?
We've purchased in very small pockets some curriculum materials, but we have not done a K-12 adoption since, again, 2000, you said 14? Yeah. So it's been a long time. Again, sometimes there'll be a vendor who will let us use materials for a year, and then if we like them, we could purchase it for that grade level or that grade band or that's one school or that one department. But in terms of all the K-12, we just haven't done that in almost a decade.
So one last question.
Okay. Well, one of the questions that has come up, even outside of the levy conversation, is what are we doing with our ESSR funds? Our ESSR funds were those emergency relief dollars that the federal government passed on to the state, and the state determined how to divide it up to its different stakeholders like schools. We received $180,000 in the first round of ESSR. We received about $600,000 from the second round of ESSR, called ESSR 2. And we actually have about $1.4 million in the third round of ESSR. Most of the third round, and we have timeframes to spend this. So the first round of ESSR, we used to help we used to support a robust meal delivery program that we had when the schools closed, to make sure that all of our students out in the community, we did meal deliveries to all the households in our community, and we provided, I think it was 800 to 1,000 meals a day to our community. And we used the ESSR funds to help pay for that, the first round of ESSR funds. The second round of ESSR funds we used to support the virtual learning that we did, and we thought when kids came back to school that a block schedule was the best thing for kids, meaning that they would only go to 3 classes a day. That's a little inefficient. It's not as efficient as a 6-period day. So there was additional cost to that. So we spent that money on online learning platform, hiring some extra teachers to teach at the virtual academy and to teach in those block schedules at the middle school and the high school. The third round of ESSR, most of that we spent about half of it to date. As part of the COVID guidelines, we needed to improve our air filtration systems in our buildings. So we had to go to a higher quality air filter that was super expensive. And there's a million of them. I mean, I don't know how many are in each building, but it's a lot. And we also provided individual air purification systems for every classroom and office space in the district to help filter the air better. And then we have the online school is still operating for those families that really didn't want their kids to come back to in-person. So that's an additional cost that we're not getting funded for by the state. And then the rest of the money, that's about, 35% of that money. The rest of the money is going to be used. We have until the end of next school year to spend it. And it's going to be used to support really robust after-school learning programs for kids to help them catch up. Because we know that everywhere, 2 years of not being in school, there's a learning gap that has occurred. So we're going to use money for robust after-school programs, a really robust summer school, and then we're going to roll those programs into next year as well. And hopefully we can make those funds last the full 2 years so that we can have these programs while the federal government is helping us with that. Can I hit these last two? I can hit these last two questions in like 3 minutes, but I think it's important. Okay. So fund balance, when is it reported? Our official fund balance is reported at the end of the year. And that is what is used by OSPI and everybody to determine what our fund balance is for the year. We report out our fund balance every month to the school board and it is a roller coaster ride because we have to pay all that money that we're spending on special ed that we can maybe get back at the end of the year. We have to pay that cost up front. And the state doesn't allocate our money 1/12 of the money every month. The state allocates it kind of like this. And the last 3 months of the year, we get about 40% of our revenue. So it's kind of a roller coaster the way our fund balance is, but the official fund balance is at the end of the year. And then the second question that's come up is, and I know where this came from, what does median total compensation mean? I think we've heard people talking about median total compensation. And so if I'm a person making $50,000 a year, well, I make $50,000 a year as that person, but the cost for me to be an employee is greater than $50,000 per year. The employer is paying a portion of the medical benefits. The employer is paying their Social Security tax, their portion of the Social Security tax, their portion of the income tax, their portion of all the other employment taxes, their portion of the Long-Term Care Act, their portion of workers' comp. So there's that $50,000 quickly becomes the number that is widely used is 40 to 45% additional costs are incurred by businesses, by school districts, of course, by really everybody to pay the cost of that's the cost of a worker. So if somebody says total compensation, it's not like salary plus bonus, it's salary plus all those taxes and benefits that the employer has to pay on behalf of the employee. And it doesn't go into the employee's pocket. It's just, it's cost of doing business in the United States.
All right, I want to publicly thank Marshall and Josh and the board and all of our administrators and staff who are here tonight to help answer these questions. It's very encouraging to see so many questions coming in from the community asking about how the levy works. So I want to thank everyone in the community as well for that. I encourage you, if you weren't able to get your question into this forum, to reach out, send an email. I know Marshall and Josh are always ready to answer an email, or just ask any staff member, and we'll gladly give you the information that you need. And then I want to thank everyone for attending, and we're wrapping it up. So thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.